A very good morning, guys. Today we're going to look about the pain pathway. Fine. So, as we all know, pain is a protective reflex in our body, and pain can be of the sensory system. Basically, if you see, it can be of two types. It can be a medial limnoscal or your anterolateral system. So, today we are going to look up about the anterolateral system in depth. Okay. So, anterolateral system is nothing but your spinothalamic system or your spinothalamic tracts. It can be of two types. It can be your ventral or your anterior spinothalamic tract or your lateral spinothalamic tract. It can be your ventral or anterior or your lateral spinothalamic tract. If you look at the ventral or the anterior spinothalamic tract, it carries your crude touch and your pressure. And if you look at the lateral, it can carry your pain and temperature. Fine. So if you look at that, it can carry your crude touch and pressure, and your lateral can carry your pain and your temperature. Okay. So just keep this in mind. Okay. If you look at any stimuli for the body to sense, it has to have some receptors, isn't it? So likewise, if you see, the receptors for your pain and temperature is going to be what is called as your nociceptors. Fine. So the nociceptors, if you see, they are going to detect your stimuli, and they are carrying those stimuli to the spinal cord via certain fibers, which you are going to discuss that. Okay. Now the nociceptors, if you see, they can be of A delta and your C fibers. Most of them would have been familiar of this. So this A delta fibers, as we all know, it carries your sharp pain, it carries your acute type of pain, your pricking type of pain, and it is your myelinated nerve fibers, and it carries, since it is sharp, around 6 and 30 meters per second. Fine. Carries impulses at a rate of 6 and 30 meters per second. And your C fibers is slow, chronic, and a throbbing type of pain, and it is non-myelinated. Fine. So this, if you see, this will respond in case of any damage to the tissues, and it is felt in a very deeper structures, whereas this A delta fibers, it is felt in a superficial aspect, like in your epidermis. If you look at it, it carries impulse at rate of 0.5 and 2 meter per second. Okay. So this is what your A delta fibers and C fibers are going to carry your nociceptive impulses. Now if you look at the A delta fibers, it is going to carry your stimuli. Basically, you have three types of stimuli. You have your thermal, you have your chemical stimuli, you have your thermal stimuli, you have your chemical stimuli, and you have your mechanical stimuli. Fine. You have your thermal, you have your chemical, and your mechanical stimuli. So if you look at the A delta fibers, it is not going to detect your chemical, it is going to detect your thermal and your mechanical stimuli. And if you look at the C fibers, it is going to detect your thermal, chemical, as well as your mechanical. It's going to detect all these three. If you look at the chemical, it is nothing but it is your histamines, your bradykinin, your potassium ions, all these sort of things. So your A delta fibers, it is going to carry your thermal and mechanical stimuli, and your extreme temperatures, and your C fibers is going to carry your all the three, your thermal, chemical, and your mechanical. Fine. Okay. Now this ventral or anterior spinothalamic tract, the receptor is going to be your Merkel discs. Merkel discs are your free nerve endings. So this is going to be your Merkel discs or your free nerve endings, and these free nerve endings carries both your A delta and your C fibers. So your free nerve endings and your Merkel discs carry your crude touch and your pressure, and your nociceptor carries your pain and temperature. Okay. Now, before going into the pain pathway, you should know that if you look at the spinal cord, okay, if you look at the spinal cord, your always remember that your motor fibers, they leave the spinal cord in your anterior aspect. Motor fibers, they leave in your anterior aspect, and your sensory fibers, that is all these we are going to discuss, they enter your posterior aspect of your spinal cord. So I call this area as your posterior aspect of your spinal cord, posterior gray horn. Fine. So you have your white matter outside, and you have your gray matter inside. You have a central canal, and this is opposite in case of your brain. You have your white matter inside, your gray matter outside in your brain. Okay. Now this is the overall view, and let us see now how these fibers, they enter into your spinal cord, and they are carried to the What is the destination? Ultimately it's going to be your somatosensory cortex, your broadband areas. Okay, fine. So if you look at here, I'm going to first finish off your okay, let's before going into that, if you look at the spinal cord, you have a lot of divisions like this. Okay, if you closely look at it, these divisions, they are known as your laminalis. They are known as your laminalis. Okay, it is your first one, it is your second, it is your third, it is your fourth and fifth, and it goes on up to 9. There are 9 types, laminalis 1 to laminalis 9. Okay, I'll tell you why it is important. So now if you look at the C fibers, so I'm going to draw the C fibers in red, in brown, sorry. If you look at the C fibers, from the periphery, they are carried and they have a pseudo unipolar neuron. They rest in your dorsal root ganglion and they carry the impulses to the spinal cord, and they rest in your second or your third lamina. They rest in your second or your third lamina. So this second and third lamina, as this resters, they are known as your substantia gelatinosa. What is it? Substantia gelatinosa. So from here, these fibers, they join in your anterior commissure. Fine. They pass here. What is this? This area is your lateral spinothalamic tract, and this is your anterior spinothalamic tract. Fine. This is your anterior spinothalamic tract, this is your lateral spinothalamic tract. Your C fibers, they enter and they rest in your second and third laminalis, which is in the substantia gelatinosa, and then they join in your anterior commissure. Anterior commissure is the midline where your fibers cross, and they cross the spinal cord and they exit the spinal cord via your lateral spinothalamic tract, which goes like this. Fine. Okay. Now if you look at the A delta fibers, they carry the impulses from the periphery. They have a pseudo unipolar neurons, and from the dorsal root ganglion, they rest in your first one and your fifth one. If you look at this nucleus, lamina 1, this is known as your lamina marginalis, and the fifth one is lamina reticularis. Fine, this is your first one and this is your fifth one. Okay, so your A delta fibers, they carry the impulses and they have a pseudo unipolar neuron. They rest in your dorsal root ganglion. They enter the posterior gray horn of your spinal cord. They rest in your first and your fifth laminalis, and as a result, in the same way, they also join and they also pass through the lateral spinothalamic tract and they enter into your brainstem. And now the last group of fibers is your free nerve endings, isn't it? This free nerve endings, they carry the impulses and they rest in your dorsal root ganglion, and this is not that much important. They rest, some say that they rest in third and some say that they rest in fourth, so we are not much bothered about that. And it goes and it enters your anterior spinothalamic tract and they move upward. So these two enter your lateral spinothalamic tract. Your free nerve endings, they pass and they enter your anterior spinothalamic tract. Okay, now this is from ear to ear. This is your first order neuron, and from here your second order neuron arises and it reaches your thalamus, and from thalamus your third order neuron arises. Okay, now this is your central canal. Fine. So first let us see your C fibers. Okay, your C fibers, as I said, they enter and your second order neuron, the first order neuron enters the posterior gray horn of the spinal cord, and your second order neuron arises and via your lateral spinothalamic tract they move upward and they rest in your thalamus, and from the thalamus they are distributed to the cerebral cortex, your somatosensory areas of your cerebral cortex. Okay, now this is your first order neuron, and this is your second order neuron, and this is your third order neuron. Okay, so if you look at here, if you look at the first order neuron, this is second order neuron, this is your third order neuron. So if you look here, the first order neuron, the C fibers, we are talking about the C fibers, it enters and it via your lateral spinal column goes up, and 85% of your C fibers, they give another tract. Most of them, they give tract to your, what is this? This is your reticular formation. This is your reticular formation. Fine. So most of the C fibers were going up. 85% of your C fibers, they give your fibers to the reticular formation, and they move to the thalamus. So if you look at the thalamus, you have some Y-shaped structure in your thalamus. Fine. You have lot of nucleus here. They are known as your intralamellar nucleus. So there are a lot of interlamellar nuclei, and most important, if you see, it's going to be your centromedian nuclei and your posterofascicular nucleus. Centromedian and your posterofascicular nucleus. So if you look at these two nucleus, this is where your C fibers is going to rest in your thalamus, and from here they are third order neuron arises and they are carried to your somatosensory areas, that is your in the parietal lobe. This corresponds to your lower extremity, this is your fingers, this is your trunk, and this is your face. So they carry impulses all over this area, and for example, if I get a prick in my hand, all these impulses are carried to somewhere here. This is your somatosensory area for my hand. So this is how the C fibers are carried, and they are very important because they also carry the impulses to your, what is this? This is your cingulate gyrus. This is a cingulate gyrus, and also to your, and this is your anterior insular cortex. So both these cingulate gyrus and your anterior insular cortex, they are concerned with your emotions. Fine. This pain is really an emotional thing, right? Now if you look at the next fibers, it is your, I'm going to draw your A delta group of fibers. Okay, your A delta group of fibers, they pass first order neuron, your second order neuron arises, they pass your lateral spinothalamic tract, they move upwards, and some of it gives to the reticular formation, and they end in this nucleus in your thalamus, and from here the third order neuron arises and it supplies. So what is this nucleus? This nucleus in your thalamus, this is your, you can remember it as VIP. Fine. And you put this P here, it is your ventro-postero inferior nucleus or ventro-posterolateral nucleus. So this is your ventro-postero-inferior nucleus, and this is your ventro-posterolateral nucleus where your A delta fibers goes and rests here, whereas your C fibers, it goes into your thalamus. You have your centromedian and posterior fascicular nuclei, and it also supplies your cingulate and your insular cortex. And next group of fibers is your free nervatics, right? So this first order neurons. So this zoomed version is this. So specific, if you ask me specifically where it synapse, you have to tell me this: marginalis 1, marginalis 2, marginalis 3, marginalis 4, marginalis 5. And for simplicity, I'm just drawing it. So for second order neuron arises, it goes in your, this is your anterior spinothalamic tract. So it goes upwards, and it also rests in your ventro-postero-inferior nucleus or your ventro-posterolateral nucleus, and from here your third order neuron arises and it supplies your cerebral cortex. Okay. In addition to this, your anterolateral system, in addition to your anterior spinothalamic tract and your lateral spinothalamic tract, it also gives tracts to some of your fibers. It also gives tract to some of the areas. For example, it has what is called as your spino-reticular tract. It has your spinotectal tract. It has your spinothalamic. Fine. These are all the other tracts which are given by anterolateral system apart from this. So your spino-reticular, this is your spino-reticular, as I said, this is your spino-reticular. And if you look at the spinotectal, this is your spinotectal area. So your fibers, your anterolateral system, they give your spinotectal fibers, which reaches your, what is this area? This is your superior colliculus. So this reaches the superior colliculus, and here the fibers are transported. So this is full of messy, so I'll draw here. So from here, this is your superior colliculus, and from here the fibers move and they are taken to your amygdala, deep into your cerebrum, which is associated with fear and emotions. Okay, and you have something called as your spino-mesencephalic pathway. Your spino-reticular is over, your spinotectal is over, and spinothalamic. So your thalamus will be here, and the fibers they give to the thalamus. This is your spinothalamic pathway, and this is associated with the the vomiting, the fear, all those sort of things. Okay, now the most important thing is your spino-mesencephalic. So spino-mesencephalic, if you see the fibers from here, they gives off your branches to your spino-mesencephalic, which is also associated with your emotions. Fine. So you have your superior colliculus, you have your thalamus, you have your spino-reticular, spino-mesencephalic, all those sort of things. Okay. And this is other tracks apart from your anterior spinothalamic and your lateral spinothalamic. Okay. Now, okay, once your pain is reaches your cerebral cortex, and now I want to stop that pain. Okay, it's enough. Pain is enough, and I want to stop it. What I have to do? I have to send some signals to inhibit it. Right? I call it as the descending pathway. Fine, descending pathway or analgesia. So the descending pathway, if you see, it basically arises from your, what is this? This is your periaqueductal gray matter. Periaqueductal nucleus. Fine, this is your periaqueductal nuclei, and from here the descending tract arises, and first order neuron arises, and your second order neuron, they gives off a second order neuron in your raphe nucleus of magnum. From here the second order neuron arises and they reach your spinal cord, and they will send some inhibitory impulses to so that your ascending pathway is inhibited. Fine. So here you have to look at another one group of fibers come, that is your opioid fibers, opioid receptors. They contain your endorphins, enkephalins, all these are released by the opioid receptors, and they also inhibit your pain. So basically once your pain reaches, there is some pathway which inhibits the pain. Fine. So if you look at here, this is a gated area. So this is called as your gate control theory. Fine. Your descending pathway, which contains your first order neuron. This is your first order neuron, this is your second order neuron, and send some inhibitory. This is your raphe of nucleus of magnum, this is your periaqueductal gray matter, and from here it sends some inhibitory impulses so that your ascending pathway is blocked. It is also supported by your opioid receptors. So this is the overall view of how a pain pathway. Fine. And one more thing I forgot to say is your neurotransmitter. Fine. So for example, your C fibers, the neurotransmitter is going to be your substance P, and for your A delta fibers, it's going to be your glutamate. Okay, so these are all the neurotransmitters released from your A delta fibers, and you have your inhibitory fibers from your descending pathway. So I hope this makes a little sense. This gives you an overall view of how the pain pathway is going to be, and thank you for watching this video. Have a great day.